Okay. Hey everyone, it's me, Leah McDermott, the founder of Your Natural Learner and Bridge Academy, and back again for another fun day of the Unschooling 101 series that we are allowing to just come to life. So before we get into today's content, I want to address a little bit for those of you that have been following throughout the week so far. Yesterday kind of took a turn. So my original intention was that every day this week we're going to have a live call. And intentionally, yesterday, which is right in the middle of that gap, or not the gap, right in the middle of those 5 days, my intention for that day, which was the day around busting unschooling myths, was that the first 2 days of our series were really like heavy on the learning part. And then I'd give you a day to like absorb, maybe catch up if you needed to, process a few things, feel good about unschooling through these, like the myth debunking. And then we'd move into the last 2 days of the series, which are more action than learning. And so that's kind of where we are right now. But two things sort of like came to me in the planning of this content, and they actually sort of came at the last, well, the day while I was teaching the day before, and then sort of at the last minute the morning of. And so that's why we did not have a call yesterday, and you got an email. And now I know that not everybody gets or reads their emails, so I'm going to explain why there was the change from yesterday. So yesterday's content was around unschooling myths, like primary myths about unschooling that we were going to debunk together. And there were two things that happened here. The first one for me was a realization as I was planning this content that unschooling, yes, it's a philosophy, it's a way of, living our lives with our kids and learning, but it's also primarily a group of people. Unschoolers are a community of people that are choosing to live and learn in a certain way. And when you have myths that arise because of a lack of understanding around a group of people, the best way to debunk those myths is with social proof, with evidence to the contrary from people in that group, in that community. And so while sure, I can sit here because I've spent 20 years doing this, I talk with unschoolers all over the world all of the time. I have the research, I have the experience. I could certainly sit here and talk to you for an hour about what are these primary myths, right? That unschoolers are unsocialized, that unschoolers do nothing all day, that unschoolers can't go to college. I could definitely talk to you about my personal experiences with that, the experiences that I've seen, the like statistics and research around that. But that's just from one person. And wouldn't it be better if those stories around those myths not being true came from all kinds of people? So that was the first thing that came to me. And the other part, what that kind of meshed with yesterday was the day before, and maybe some of you that were on that live call or that have watched the replay by now recognized this moment. You might have even like seen me have my own aha moment in that experience. That was the day that we were talking about how we learn. And in the section where I was talking about the levels of learning and how like the lowest level of learning is level one is passive learning, and that the retention rate is really small there. And like that's just like lectures. And I had a realization in that moment that that's what I was actively doing. While I was telling you that the lowest level of learning is passive lectured learning, that's what I was doing. I was giving a lecture just like I am now. And that kind of sparked some like, all right, I need to do some of my own work here. Now, we could argue that because you are choosing to be here, you're not forced, right? No one is waking you up and making you sit through these things. That technically this is considered level 6 self-directed. If you're engaging in the chat, that's some level like 3 and 4 because you're applying, you're engaging in conversation. So of course it's not just level 1 learning because you chose to be here, you are implementing this into your life. The way that I was teaching was at a level 1. And so for my own growth and benefit, and yours as well, I wanted to explore that a little more. How could I teach you, even though this is, digital and across time zones and time, how could we even take one of the days this week and raise that level a little bit? How can we get some more engagement? How can we seek out the community? How can we have conversations? What could we do to increase that? And then, of course, naturally, those two things really go together when I'm asking for community involvement. So yesterday turned into fully its own living creature now. And I want to tell you about what we're doing with that. And then we will pause for recording purposes, and then we'll get into today's content. So, which I'm really excited to talk about, actually. It should be really good for you. But what we've done instead is I sent out an email yesterday morning telling you we're not going to do video. We're going to do this a little bit differently. And I invited you to reply to that email and share what unschooling myths you have come up against, whether that is you personally still believe it, or you're struggling with believing it, or someone in your worldview is believing that myth and it's making it hard for you because you feel like you're constantly trying to prove that it's not true through your existence, or just ones that you've heard, things that are really pervasive that you see online, whatever, just share that. And I'm actually surprised at how many people did respond. I sort of thought that not many people would reply, and a lot of you did, which is pretty cool. So we've been able to piece together, some of them are very similar, but it does help to have a lot of people phrasing the same myth in different ways, to sort of hear how it's being presented to them. It helps with the response. So we're going to take all this. I'm going to give it probably until the weekend for people to see that email and take the time to respond. And then next week, after this series is done, we're going to take those probably 10 primary questions. Right now there's 20, but I think we can condense them. And we're going to put them out on my social media. And this is going to be fun because it's also going to be a little bit of a social experiment, because I'm not only talking to the people that are in this room choosing to be here, choosing to live this way. Inevitably, there will be people in the comments that want to argue for the truth of the myth, even though they're not involved in the community. So it should be very interesting to see what happens. But primarily, we're doing this so that we can present this myth to the public, right? This is a common myth about unschooling. Now, as unschoolers, how can you prove that that's not true? And we're going to invite hopefully a lot of fantastic conversation and evidence to the contrary of these myths. And then not only will that just exist there as this communal project, but we're going to find a way to kind of condense all of that as a resource that will be very helpful for someone that's still new on this journey, or having a moment where someone is asking them about these myths and they don't feel confident yet to debunk them, don't know how to handle it. They'll have that resource. So, and hopefully it takes our level of learning up a little bit, right? We're using level 3 here, that we're having conversations around it. Level 4, when you reply with your things that have happened to you, you're applying that learning. And then of course, just choosing to be involved is that level 5 and level 6. So this has been fun to kind of put together, but that's what happened yesterday. Okay. So we are going to move into today's topic. I am going to, just because this recording is going to go into where everyone from our group can see it, but we're going to also use this in the future. So I'm going to pause for a moment, and then we're going to kind of restart. All right, so we are here in our next day of the Unschooling 101 series. The first 2 days of this were the learning phase for you. This is where we defined what was wrong with school. We talked about the history of, the modern school system, how we went from industrialization to standardization, and then how that is harmful to individuals, families, and a society just in general, what that does to the humanness of people. And then on the second day, we looked at how do we learn? the research behind, or the science behind what our brain needs to be able to be motivated, to be interested, to care about something, how we use that combined with information. Hopefully you've made time to watch that other YouTube video we linked for you around that formula, more details around that. And we looked at the levels of learning and how, the more control the learner has over the situation, the higher their retention rate of the content, because have more motivation, they're more engaged. And hopefully what's happened now is that you've been able to identify a gap between those two truths. That this is what we know is true. We know that this is how humans learn. We know that this is how motivation happens. We know that this is, how we learn and how we retain information, how we can recall that information, how we use it. We know all that to be true. And we know to be true both because you sat in on day one and you've likely experienced these things as, within the public school system in some capacity, as a student, as a parent, as an educator, as a passersby, right? Now you know that to be true as well. So you're able to see the gap that exists between those two things. There's this space in the middle of what's happening and what's we know to be true. And what's cool here is that in that gap is where deschooling exists. Everything between what's happening in the school system and what that does to you, and what we know that's true about learning, everything in between there, that's where deschooling lives. That's where the work of deschooling lives. And so this is where in this series we shift from the learning portion of content to the action portion of content. Now you understand, but you're not done here. You can't just acknowledge that something's wrong and do nothing about it. Not in anything that's going to be positive, right? Now we're going to transition into the work part, into the action part, into the, right, what do I do about this now part. So that gap in between there, that is deschooling. And this is where our work begins. And before I even talk to you about how to deschool, we have to have a little conversation about what it really is. So I'm sure that you've heard this word, all right? And I know we have a variety of people that are watching this, people that have already been unschooling for a while, that have been following me for a while and have probably heard me say a lot of these things. But ultimately, the purpose of this series is for someone who is very new to the idea of unschooling. And so for those people, the most exposure they've had to the word deschooling is likely thrown around in homeschooling Facebook groups, right? Or they're told by a veteran homeschooler that it's just a thing you have to do in the process. And it's very well-meaning. Everyone that suggests deschooling is doing it from a good place. There's a recognition that the school experience was traumatic or negative in some way. And there's a recognition that, we want to be doing something different than what that was in our homes. And then there's a recognition that there's going to be a period in between where things are going to look a little messy and you just kind of have to help adjust from one to the other. But what happens when that's all you see it as, if you only see deschooling as like this pause button or this like empty space between two, polar opposite things, we could intentionally create a harmful situation here. And we're going to go into this a little bit more in a minute, but I want to talk about this here. We can't view deschooling as like you're moving to a new town. Right? If you've ever moved from one location to another, then you know that there's like your life in this house, this town, this community, there's your life here. And then there's that period of moving where you're like, you're actively physically moving, you're doing all the work of like emotionally moving, you're saying goodbye to people, you're meeting new people. And then there's that transition period before you're like, oh, okay, now I have this like new normal in this new town or new house or new neighborhood that I live in. And there was just that moving transition period in between where things were a little kind of crazy, but eventually the norm that you settled into was pretty much the same as it was somewhere else, just in a different location with different people, different job, different schools, but ultimately everything is the same. And that's not deschooling. And we can't look at it that way, because what that tells our brains is that everything over here in that first place was actually fine. It was just different. And so we're going to have this like weird, awkward transition period, but eventually we want to settle back into something that looks and feels identical, just like in a different spot. And that's not the goal. Especially if unschooling is your ultimate goal, that's not the goal. If you paid attention in days 1 and 2, we don't want to settle back into anything that looked like what school was before. So again, people that suggest this idea that deschooling is this like phase or this pause or this break where you're just readjusting, your kids are readjusting, it's all very well meaning. But we have got to start having conversations about how this is a much deeper thing. Deschooling is not just this like passive phase of nothing. It's really not even a phase. Deschooling is a conscious undoing of the schooled mindset. It is a healing of traumas. It is a transition of sorts, but more than anything, it is not a gap between two things. Deschooling is as much a part of unschooling as anything else. These are working in tandem. Unschooling is the philosophy of learning that we are shifting to away from public schools, but deschooling is the healing conscious journey that you are taking. You want to think of it as like physical therapy or something, right? It is a conscious choice and active things that you are doing to undo beliefs and habits and fears. And we'll get into that. But I want to address real quick the harm that can happen and that I see all of the time from believing and acting like deschooling is this gap. So you may have seen this conversation before, right? Oh, you're switching from, a veteran homeschool will say, oh, you pulled your kids out of school. That's awesome. That's great. You really should deschool for a while first. And then we explain that it's just a time for the kids to like get used to being home again, what it feels like to sleep in, let them trust their bodies again. Again, all true, all great, all well-meaning. But if we approach it from a fully passive standpoint and from a standpoint of eventually they'll get back to normal, what happens is it becomes just this chaotic nothingness. It's just this empty space where the parents kind of feel like they should be doing something, but they've been told by this person to let the kid adjust. And the child, especially, this is so especially true for kids that are pulled out of public school and transitioned to homeschooling. And we'll talk about, there are different circumstances, of course, and everyone should be deschooling. But in this situation, the most common situation where a child is pulled out of public school and now is home, and out of the well-meaning advice that many families take to go through a deschooling period, there's just this emptiness. And in the past, when I've described this, I've used the analogy of like you're in a factory and that's all you've ever known, and then you suddenly have this awareness that this isn't life, this isn't where I want to be. So you just press the emergency stop button, everything halts, and you walk out the factory doors into the sunshine. And at first, it's like, yes, I'm free, that's over, that's not me anymore. And at first, that's going to feel great for you, and that's going to feel great for your children because of the like surface level of things, right? I hate waking up in the morning. I hate homework. I don't like that teacher. I'm away from those bullies. I don't like doing rote memorization. At first, that feels fantastic. But if there's no work, active work around Why did we feel that way? What did those feelings do to us? How are we addressing these conversations and these like emotions? If we just hands off of our kids while also having an expectation that at some magical juncture they'll be healed and be ready to come back and do whatever work you haven't undone, right? That you are going to expect, curriculum at home, learning certain things, checklists, benchmarks. There's just it like we don't know what to do with that space anymore. And then it becomes boring, it becomes uncomfortable, and in many, many cases, homeschooling fails. And I don't like using that word, but like a homeschooling family is very much more likely to go back to public school within the first month of the transition rather than years later. And that happens because they come home, the parents have this expectation of like, all right, I'll give you a little bit of a time to adjust, but I want you like in their heads, they're saying we have this expectation of you coming back to normal. And the kids don't know what to do with themselves because they're still deep in the conditioning of productivity and all of the harm we talked about in the first day of this series, that they don't know what to do. So their instinct, they don't feel safe emotionally. So their instinct is to just do as much of all the things that they don't get to do normally, like video games, like watching TV, like sleeping, like eating junk food. They crave all of those things because they don't know if it's going to be taken away from them. And because we haven't done any of this work collectively, that's exactly what happens. We just proved to them that it wasn't ultimately safe because we didn't feel good about it. They didn't feel good about it. They start asking you to go back to school. You say, I can't be with you anymore. And it just crashes and burns. And most of the time that happens because of a lack of understanding of what deschooling really is. So it is a huge misunderstanding. I don't like saying that it's a myth. It's a misunderstanding that deschooling is this like pretty little pause button where you just like learn to love yourself and learn to love your kid again, and then everything is peachy and you can go right back to doing school at home and everyone feels good about it. That's just not true. And it can cause a lot of harm and a lot of chaos and ultimately just destroy. And you have so many families that'll say, well, we tried homeschooling and it was a disaster. Did you really? Or did you just not have the right information to get started? So let's talk about why deschooling is a part of unschooling. Like they're one and the same, really. So to understand that, we have to know what unschooling is. And again, the myth busting would have helped with this a little bit, but it is a philosophy of learning that learning happens all of the time. It is not a structured understanding of learning. It is not forced. The core belief around unschooling is that children deserve autonomy and trust in their innate interest and abilities and the way that they're going to seek out learning in the world. It is not a predetermined course of learning. In the world of unschooling, in the philosophy of unschooling, we do not say things like all kids should blank by age blank. We don't say that because we understand that every human is unique. Everyone's interests are unique. Our motivations happen on a unique timeline. Do we still, understand the science of things, the trends? Do we know how to like guide our children's interests? Of course, and that's all part of the learning. Unschooling does not mean that you are hands off and just expect your kids to figure out everything in the universe without your assistance. It's an understanding of those levels of learning, that the more the learning is guided by the child, by the learner, the more understanding they're going to get. So we create environments where they feel safe and free to have those discussions without the pressure of forced performance, without the pressure of, engaging in a certain way, with there being rights and wrongs in the way that they're engaging. It is not a predetermined course of learning. It's honoring that unique individual and the embodiment of the belief that all of life is learning, which is the motto at Bridge Academy, that all life is learning. A huge part of unschooling is a realization that academics is just a tiny little part of who we are as humans. So it's not just a school or education belief system. in a public school, that's what we focus on, right? If you ask any administrator, what's the point of school? They're going to tell you something around academics. Unschooling is much wider than that. It is a belief that all of life is learning and that everything in life presents an opportunity to learn something. And so when we believe that to be true, when we believe, yes, everything in life offers me an opportunity, if I'm available to learn it, if I'm open to it, everything in life offers an opportunity for me to learn something. If you remove the filter of academic learning and just see things as learning in life, then we have to embrace every moment and what it's providing for us. Now, that might be passions. It might be creativity. It might be intense study. But if you've done that healing work to let go of the belief that only certain things are productive, like following a passion, like being creative, like being curious, like intensely studying something, like something that looks academic, that something must be work or school related to be productive. If we heal from that, if we let go of that, then we can also see the learning in things like rest, joy, healing, pausing, spending time with others, reading for pleasure. We start to see the opportunities to learn from things that the school system ultimately has made us believe and internalize about what is good use of time and bad use of time. Now, some of the things that happen when we are doing this deschooling work is we're undoing beliefs from the school system, habits from the school system, and fears from the school system. So I want to pause a minute and talk about what those three things are so you understand like the work that we're doing here, and then we'll talk about how it can happen more actionably in action. So beliefs are things like, especially that we talked about in days 1 and 2 here, right? What are the beliefs that we've walked away from the school system with? How learning happens, where learning happens, when learning happens. I personally have a child that learns or engages, his brain is 100% on, like when I'm ready to go to bed. 10 o'clock at night, he's ready to like have conversations that are world changing. Or Saturday on the way to a soccer game, like the most random times. This child is like, bing, brains on, mom, I got 1,000 questions. We got to talk about some things. Can you imagine a school system trying to work around that or convince you that that was okay? How could you ever standardize a child whose brain is turned on at any time other than 8 to 3? That's a belief that we've been made to internalize. Learning happens in a certain way, it looks a certain way. The trajectory of life and of learning should look a certain way. Being productive looks like good grades. Being a good citizen looks like this. All of these beliefs that we've internalized, and it might be a good practice for you to sit down and write all of these things out, make these categories on a piece of paper. My beliefs, my habits, my fears. What did growing up in, not just growing up in the school system, but growing up in a society where that was what was expected, that was the training grounds for life. Because even if you didn't engage or you just kind of skated through the school system, or even if you went through the school system and chose before you even had kids to unschool them or homeschool them, you still have these conditions because you grew up in a society where that system was the norm. That was the training ground for adulthood. So what beliefs did you walk away believing? What habits did you create or embody because of that system? Setting an alarm to wake up in the morning, that, these times of the day were when you were supposed to be productive. The separation of subjects. You learn math by itself, you learn reading and literature by itself, science by itself. That doesn't happen in real life, right? I'm using all of the parts of my brain. I don't have a math part that I turn on when I need to calculate something, and then I turn that off, and then I turn on the reading part. That's not real. But those are habits that were created that we segment our day, that we eat lunch at this certain time of day, even if we're not hungry, that we don't go to the bathroom unless we're at a break between these, certain projects that someone else has determined, that we always have this authority figure that we have to adhere to no matter what, that we have to earn their praise. That falls into beliefs and fears too, right? But what habits have we just naturally created because of what we were forced into at a very young age? And then fears. And that happens specifically, what fears when you step away from that system, when you make a conscious decision to say, I don't like that, we're going to do something different. What is just like instantly downloaded onto you of like, oh boy, and this is where those myths come in too, right? Myths and fears are very similar. Oh my gosh, my child won't be able to go to college. How do I know they're going to learn everything? I was so bad in school. Am I really prepared to teach them? How will they make friends? What if I get in trouble? What does my mother-in-law think? Like what if my child resents me for doing this? What if I do it all wrong? What if I don't find the right community? Just fears, fears, fears that happen when you step away from the system that raised you. And that everything that you write down, whether that's like actively do it or you just start thinking of things, and by the way, they won't all come out at the same time because we don't always even realize that they're in there. We don't even realize why we're doing things. Have you ever just like stopped to think, why do I do this way? And usually it's because, oh, my mom did. Or someone will ask you, like, why do you put that in your coffee? Oh, that's just the way my mom did it. Or that's what my dad did. So that's what I've always done, right? We just kind of pick these things up through life, often without questioning them because that's what was, imprinted on us. And so you might be able to write a lot of things down, but this is why deschooling is not just this pretty little phase, this pretty little gap. Deschooling is work that we will be doing. If it took you, you know, 30, 20, 30, 40 years of being in the system before you questioned it, how long will it take you to undo that? Things are going to continue to pop up. You literally live watched me have a moment on day 2 of this series where I was like, oh, wow, I'm teaching them about level 1 and that's all that I'm doing. That was a deschooling moment for me of like a real aha, okay, I got to go home and break this down because I I was still like I wasn't prepared to have that. Why was I doing this? I've been doing this for 20 years and I still have these moments of like I need to check myself. Something isn't right here. Why am I having this fear? Why do I believe that that's true? Why is this a habit that I have? So this is work that will always come up. It will always be done. And the beautiful thing about unschooling is that all of life presents that opportunity. You are still a learner. You get to unschool too. This is a journey you get to take with your child. This isn't just now you're a teacher, they're a student. You have to get them through the age of 18 and send them into the world. The beautiful thing here is that you get to heal. You get to model that. And you get to do this together and think of how world changing that is. So, when you embrace that belief, which by the way, that part is easy. You can do that right now, right this minute. You can just make a decision that you believe that all of life is a learning opportunity. I believe that that is true. It doesn't mean that all of your work is done. It doesn't mean that you don't have to still do a lot of unlearning and healing and deschooling and the willingness to confront this. But you can accept that belief right now, and that will make things a lot easier because then you can say, all right, now I see, I believe that that's true. So now I can start this work. Now I can step fully into unschooling while understanding that in this process, and likely for maybe the rest of my life, I will be on this journey of deschooling, of healing, not as some separate entity or some separate timeline, not as this like pause period where I have to like, I'm giving myself 6 months to fix everything. And then we're just going to go back to a normal because you can't. You can't heal from traumas and just go back to a normal. There's no normal to go back to. You are creating a new normal every day as you are on this healing journey, as everything becomes a little bit easier, your normal is changing. So that's the journey that we're heading on. Now, before we get into some action steps, and by the way, today might go a little long, but it's important conversations to have. Let's talk about this transition now from like this public school mindset into unschooling and deschooling. One thing I want to identify here, and I mentioned this before, but I want to identify the uniqueness of the journey for different people. Because the hardest part about deschooling is that it's like being the best analogy I can think of is like having the stomach flu at the same time your kids have the stomach flu. Like there's nothing worse than being sick, except being sick and also having to be a mom. And everyone can resonate with that. And that's deschooling. That's what that is. That's realizing that you have to heal from something and also realizing that your child has to heal from something. Now, there are a few different groups of people here. There is going to be the mother who has fortunately for her, or the father, right? The parent who has fortunately made this discovery early enough that the child does not ever enter the public school system. So they can start their deschooling journey before the child's even born, before they even have kids, which is why it's so important that we have these conversations as a society, that we start, this is how generations start to change, right? We don't have to wait until we're parents to realize we've had traumas that impact our parenting, right? We can do this work in advance. So there are going to be those people that have started this deschooling process before they even have kids, while the kids are very young, before they enter the public school system. So there's less tandem work there, and it's just parental work. And so the main goal, if that's you, is getting as much of that done and being aware of the decisions that you're making with your children, that even if you're not sending them to public school, are you still maybe unconsciously creating those beliefs and habits in the child's experiences because you haven't done your work yet, right? You can definitely still create school trauma for homeschooled kids. Just because your child's never set foot in a public school doesn't mean you have not accidentally created some of those similar traumas because you hadn't done your own work yet. All right. So we're going to have those people that have a bit of a jump start. And then there's going to be the families, and this is like the biggest group that we're in right now, and probably most of us here are, that your kids were in school. You just did it because that's what everyone else did. And through some experience, whether, who knows, right? There's so many individual situations that send us to this journey. Now you're here and you have to do that healing work. You're sick and your kid's sick. And you have to be the person that's healing your own crap at the same time as helping your child heal that for themselves as well. And the hard part here, the really, really hard part here, is that there's a big difference between being an adult that has a fully developed brain and emotional system, right? You fully are aware that the traumas that were imparted on you in school, that happened for a reason, right? You are aware of a trauma from the past. You can now have the awareness to say things like, wow, I was taught to believe that this was true, but now I see it's not. A child that's still in the system of conditioning that is not fully developed yet can't have that awareness. And it feels very unsafe for that child's emotional regulation system. Not that they don't feel safe at home. I don't mean it that way. The emotional regulation, like the internal, deep, like safe part of us, the most basic part of humans that we don't, the subconscious part, it's not going to feel the same as being an adult that's aware of trauma and I have to heal it. A child that is actively being conditioned and developing in that conditioning to suddenly be taken away from that, even if it feels good for a little while, right? Like that analogy I said of like walking into the sunlight, oh, it feels great. And now like, oh, this is really, I don't know what to do. Even if it was traumatic, even if they hated it, actively knew that it was traumatic, that's still what the norm was. That's what every day by someone, you, peers, teachers, society, social media, television, someone or someone's in their life every day was telling them, this is normal. This is what we do. This, of course you hate it. Everyone hates it. All of this was the normal for that child. And now it's a positive thing that you've identified that it isn't, you're pulling them out of it, but you need to understand how hard that is going to be for most children who are still in that very impressionable stage of their lives from, ages 3 to 22, of how that's going to affect them and what that deschooling process is going to look like for them. So this is where we step into the actions. All right. So hopefully you're like able to identify where you fall there. And maybe this is just a sigh of relief for a lot of you to be like, whew, yeah, actually, that's exactly where I am. And it's super hard. It's really hard to help a child actively in that experience find security and safety and confidence again, because ultimately that's what they're doing. You're telling a human, you took a human who was born creative and curious and trusting of themselves, and trusting of the adults in their lives and trusting of others to guide them. That's how we are as humans. We took that human, and I'm not trying to make anyone feel guilty here, but an awareness is important. We can't do better until we know better. We took this child and then we, like everyone else around them, put them into this system, and suddenly none of those things were true anymore. And so we have this child that's just like, we've been changing who they are as a human for however many years they were in there. And that experience is going to change every person differently. I have seen kids who show no outward signs of problems until they're in high school. And then they've got all these years of undoing. But I have also seen 5-year-olds who go to kindergarten for a month and come out of it so traumatized that it takes years for them to feel safe to be themselves again. So we chipped away at this human for however long. And now, while they're still developing, we're taking them away from that. How hard that's going to be to find themselves, to go back. We almost need to treat them like infants again, emotionally, right? We need to emotionally take them back to that place before we put them in the system and give them that kind of love and attention and even the like academic focus. How are we providing that safe experience for them to come back to feeling the way they did when we put them in that different system, right? Those are the things we have to start thinking about. And it's going to feel very uncomfortable, especially if you've got a 15-year-old boy that's taller than you and sounds like a man. And then you're trying to like emotionally bring them back to being a creative, curious little 5-year-old that delighted in playing with dinosaurs and rediscovering some of that and just being aware of how much that matters. And again, embracing the idea that unschooling means all life is learning. If you say right here, right now, I believe that. Academics is a tiny piece. I believe that everything in life gives us a learning opportunity. If that's true, if you believe that that's true, then all of this work is going to matter. And you can say, you know what, for right now, I don't care about classes and grades and math. I care that you love yourself again, that you trust yourself as a learner, that you find things that you're passionate about. When we prioritize those things, it helps them see that. And we're nurturing them like they're just little ones again to help them heal from that. Okay. Let's talk about action steps because that's where we really want to go now. How do we deschool? What is the action of deschooling? So there's a couple steps we want to be aware of. Number one, we have to recognize that the trauma exists. Forced compliance and performance always creates trauma, period. End of story. It doesn't matter if you say to me, well, no, that's not true. Everyone's not traumatized. I went to school and I was fine. I just don't like it for my child. No, I promise you, and I don't have the time in this video to talk about the levels of educational trauma, but I'm sure I've talked about another video. It'll be in the book. We're going to talk about it in other places. So make sure you follow me everywhere. Everyone that leaves the school system is traumatized in some way. We are all walking around with educational trauma because you cannot put a human into a system where you take away their autonomy and you take away their passions and you make them believe that their intrinsic motivation is external validation. There's no way someone walks away from that without trauma. And that's going to look like things like even being a people pleaser, being a lifelong perpetual student where you think that your only value is in learning something new, right? How many of you might have thought, oh, well, I'm a lifelong learner anyway. Are you, or are you traumatized, gifted kid, right? You just feel like your only value is in if you are performing your learning. There's so many ways that trauma shows up. And every time you put someone, especially a young impressionable child, in a system where you take away their autonomy, there is going to be a trauma. So that's the first thing we have to do is we have to recognize that there is a trauma, both for ourselves and, if applicable, for our children. Absolutely for you. And I'll tell you right now, most of the deschooling work you're going to do is on yourself because you've been a part of that system, whether it was active or passive, for your whole life, right? A majority of your life, and you're older than your kid. So you have more to undo than your child does. And by the way, a little caveat here, if you are a former educator, you've got a whole other layer of deschooling and conditioning to undo. And since one of the largest groups of new homeschool parents are former educators, we've got a whole lot of deschooling out here that needs to be done, guys, okay? We have to understand that there is trauma involved and that it takes time to undo that. You're going to need a deconditioning period, not a deschooling period. You're going to need a deconditioning period where these structures of the system are still maintained for support. Okay. And again, we talked about this already, right? Children that have like lost that natural inclination to like, what am I interested in? What do I want to do? When kids are little, kids that have always been unschooled, they're very good at being bored. They're very good at finding the things that they want to do. They're good at asking questions because they've never had that autonomy taken away from them. They've never had that like forced performance. And so if you are in a situation where you're deschooling and so is your child, we might have to find these ways of transitioning away very slowly from the school system. So this is where we move into like part or step number 2. So 1 is just an awareness, right? And you can say that you've graduated from step 1 today because you've accepted and you've become aware that there are traumas here that are going to take time. And everyone, if we looked at trauma, I wish that we could look at trauma the same way as a physical wound. If you had this like festering wound on your body, you would pay attention to it. And internal traumas, we don't do that. It's very easy to say, you're fine, this isn't real, because you can't see it. So we also have to kind of like tune our awareness. The awareness isn't just like, oh yeah, okay, you're traumatized. The awareness is also, what evidence do I see in front of me? If something even looks like school, is my child shutting down and resisting? That's a trauma response. Okay, if I pull a book off the shelf, is my child like out the door? That's a trauma response, right? If I ask a question, even if I don't mean it to be like, I need you to answer it. If I just ask a question like, oh, what were you reading about? If their response is like very, very uncomfortable, that's a trauma response, right? That like loss of autonomy, they're scared that they're going to fall right back into like, their nervous system is not healed, right? So the awareness step, I guess I shouldn't have said you've graduated from it, but really like you can move you're going to keep that step with you, right, as we move on, because there is this an ongoing awareness and observation that you have to do both for yourself and for your child of where are these beliefs, habits, fears creating these responses that feel unsafe, unhealthy, resistant. You know, if you have a kid that's like gorging on food, that's a trauma response from maybe not being allowed to eat throughout the day and they were hungry. All of these things, right? We're not only looking at academics, we're looking at the beliefs and the habits and the fears that were created by this system and that created these responses of trauma that now as we're in this safer place, as that's when the healing comes out. And so one thing to be aware of is that, you know, you might have heard things like, you know, kids who act out in their safe, kids will act out in their safest place because they know that they're like safe to let go there. And that can be skewed to make excuses for a lot of things like after school meltdowns. So that's definitely not what I'm talking about here. But, you know, we have to understand that maybe it's going to get worse before it gets better. All right. As they are healing, as they are recovering from this, they might even ask things like, I just send me back to school because healing is really hard. All right. Healing is uncomfortable. Healing hurts. Healing doesn't feel good. Healing by yourself definitely doesn't feel good. If every one of your kids' friends is still just doing their own thing, even if they hate it, they're still just doing it without a problem. And your child is having to confront all of these uncomfortable emotions. That doesn't mean you should give up. And we're gonna stick this out, right? We're gonna be aware that even that is like a response to the trauma. They'd rather, if a child says something like they'd rather just go back and do the mundane crap and be miserable because they don't feel comfortable healing, they're not going to say that, right? Because they won't know what's happening, but you will see that. And you can have those conversations of, let's stick this out. You know, I think we can really make this work. Let's give ourselves some time because you are going to understand what those triggers are, what those responses are, an awareness of the traumas. All right, then we want to look at the actual transition period. And I fully understand that for a lot of people that are watching this, you likely, maybe you've always homeschooled and it's just never felt great. Or maybe it did when they were little and now that they're older, you are kind of stuck in these like fears and beliefs for older kids, but you don't know how to reconcile that. And your kids are starting to feel that discomfort. And so, you know, you're having these problems now, or maybe, you know, whatever. I understand that everyone watching this is not like, oh yeah, I just pulled my kid out of school. This is perfect timing. Or I'm going to do that. So now I get to learn, like, we don't all have the benefit of finding information at just the perfect time. So it's very likely and possible that you are watching this already like deep in the muck and the chaos and you don't quite know how to dig out of it in a way that feels like you're making progress while you're still existing day to day. And I promise you that just following this advice and following these steps, it is going to help. Like every day will feel a little bit better because if you just do these simpler things, things are going to start falling into place, right? You can't just fix, you know, if the bathtub falls through your ceiling and everything is a mess, it won't go back to normal in a day. But every day can be a little better. You can make little repairs every day, little things that help to get you to the place that you want to be. And the first part of that, again, not to, you know, beat a dead horse, but is awareness and being tuned in, not just like, "Ugh, everything is chaos." Yeah, okay, you're aware, but the little things, carry a notebook around with you if you need to, and just start paying attention to the things that you notice, not from a point of your failures, like, oh, they can't read, oh, they can't write, oh, they can't do math, oh, my neighbor made comments, oh, every day is chaos, oh, they hate school, oh, I hate this. That's not the awareness we're looking for, right? That's not helpful. That's like wallowing, basically. So what we want to do instead is, okay, I noticed that this is a comment my child made. Where's that coming from? What time of day did they say that? Right? Was they every day that we were fine during the day, and then at 5 o'clock when I, you know, they were hungry, they said, "Just send me back to school." Right? Like we're paying attention now. We're being aware of these things. And again, yes, even a child that has never been to school can still be a victim of school-based traumas by growing up in a system or in even in a home that didn't have an understanding of this, if you did not do your work as the adult to deschool before you began homeschooling, it's very likely that you created almost a situation where it's still the same traumas. And a lot of times what happens is we don't want to create that trauma. So we might we might not have any of the force. I talk to parents all the time. We're like, no, they've always homeschooled and I've never forced them to do anything, but we still have all these problems because of your emotions around it. Because if you never forced them, but you always felt guilty about it, kids are really, really, really intuitive. And they know if you have negative feelings about what they're doing, even if you don't say it or change it. And that creates those unsafe experiences or unsafe feelings where they feel like it's going to be taken away. And a good example of that is, let's say you have no screen time limits, you let your kids video game all day long. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. You have no limits. But if you're constantly making comments like, you're wasting so much time. Don't you want to read a book? I wish you'd put that away. I hate those games. If you're never like doing anything about it, but you're always making comments, they don't ever actually feel safe. And in a lot of ways, it makes them want to do it more because there's this insecurity that at some point you're going to just crash and take it away, right? Maybe you have and proven them right. So, and that's video games just one example. It might be other things too that, my kids can't do basic math, and then they feel guilty about that, but you're never actually doing anything different and you're putting these traumas on them. So you see how this could be happening. This could be this like vicious cycle. So we want to stop that. We want to break out of that, and awareness is the first step. And then the second step is slow transitions. And this is going to be especially helpful and true for kids that are just now, like if you're still in that window of like, I recently took them out, or I'm about to take them out of that system, or even I'm making a conscious choice to say, I was like school at home, very traditional curriculum all day type of learning, and I want to transition to unschooling away from that. Excuse me. Excuse me. This will be very helpful and timely for you. If you're really kind of deep in that muck, you can still do this. It just might look a little bit different. So let's talk about these slow transitions. So what this means is that sometimes when we have a child that is coming out of that system, even if we identify things like worksheets and tests and like forced learning are like those lowest levels, that's part of the problem of school. For many kids coming out of that system, that's still what made them feel safe. All right. We have to understand that they need to re-regulate that nervous system. They need to relearn and heal from that breaking down of their understanding of intrinsic motivation. For many kids, that intrinsic motivation that breaks very early on. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to heal, is that broken intrinsic motivation, because everything is going to feel to them like they have to perform for someone else. They have to be seeking this external validation by producing something, by performing something, by proving something to someone other than themselves. It doesn't feel good to do something for themselves because for however long they have believed that the way to feel good about yourself was to do something to make someone else happy. All right. So think about what that's doing to somebody. And it might still be something that you're traumatized around. I know a lot of adults walking around traumatized that way. So this isn't just our kids. So we often have to decide, what structures can we gently retain to keep them feeling safe? And I've used this example before, and I'll use it again, of my son's friend who is homeschooling with us. He went to school through all of middle school and transitioned to homeschool with us at the end of middle school and into high school. And we had, in this, I will admit this mistake, we had a very, I just kind of involved him into our already existent unschooling experience where my children made their own choices and they would ask me to do certain things and we'd do them. But for the most part, at this point, they're older, they're independent. They will straight up ask me if they need something. Hey, I want to learn this thing. I need this thing. And we just work it out together. And for a while he fit into that, but you could see after a little bit, after the like rose colored glasses fell off of like, oh yeah, I don't have to go to school, it started to feel unsafe. And he came to me and said, I think I want to go back to school. And I knew at that moment what was going on. I wasn't just like, oh, okay, yeah, it didn't work for you. No, I knew, all right, this is that moment here of why, and let's talk about it. And what do you feel like is missing, right? And because he'd been around long enough, he knew how I felt about things. He knew, what felt like a safe answer. And I was like, hey, this isn't about me, right? Like, let's talk about it. And he finally said, I would be okay if you gave me worksheets. Can you give me some worksheets that I can do? And he was like, I know that they're not like, I don't need them, but like, I need to feel like I'm doing something. And I was so proud of him to have that like awareness that I need to be doing a thing. I need that piece to feel safe. And so that's what we did. So I said, sure, totally, we can find you some worksheets. Like we can do some of those similar things that would be happening in public schools so you feel like that's the same. And we'll blend that in with some of these other elements that we're doing. And that has helped so much. It's made him feel safe again. And you can use that. That's not a failure. That doesn't mean you're not unschooling. If you're using some structures that help them transition. Will he need to do worksheets forever? Absolutely not. I probably won't even last all through this school year. But that anchors him through this transition. And the wonderful way to do this is that you can shift how the brain relies on these things, or how their emotions rely on that. So for some kids it might be the physical work. For this child it was the structure of the worksheet, filling out the worksheets. I'm not grading those worksheets. He's turning them back into me and I'll read over them and ask him if there's anything he wants to go over, but there's no performance attached to this. So in this there's still autonomy. Is he doing just like a level 2 active recall? Sure. Is he getting much out of it? Actually, retention? Probably not. I'm going to expect that like 10 to 20, 10 to 30% retention. But the safety that he feels is what matters. And he has the choice. If he ever says to me, I don't want to do this, okay, fine. You don't have to anymore. The autonomy is what matters. So in a way, the worksheets, those level 2s of learning, is self-directed. It's chosen by him. So there's nothing wrong with integrating these other elements of learning. They just need to be chosen or autonomous, right? So in this case, I used worksheets as the anchor in this transition, but I'm removing the negative piece, which is the grade, the performance. And maybe there's other things that you'll identify. The worksheets for a lot of kids might be the trigger. Don't use worksheets just because I did for this child. He needed to feel that there was something tangible that he was producing. That's the anchor that he needed. For some kids, it might be a schedule. Okay, we're not going to force you to do anything, but we're still going to wake up at the same time every day. And we're going to have this routine of every morning we're going to wake up, we're going to have breakfast together, and we're going to go for a walk to get your blood moving. And then you're free to do whatever you want if that feels good to you and to me. But that's the piece we're going to anchor. Whatever. Okay, and this is where those habits really fall into place. We want to be able to shift the beliefs while using the habits to anchor the transition, because that helps us feel safe in that interim period. We don't just want to pluck someone out of an experience and throw them into another one, no matter how negative and positive those experiences might be. The transition can be so jarring that they can't see the positive on the other side. It's like a kid who was starved, for example. You don't sit them in front of a buffet, or someone that was lost in the wilderness for weeks on end, it's emaciated. When they go to when they are recovered, they don't send them to an all-you-can-eat buffet. They would make themselves sick. They damage their body by doing that. Even though it was negative before, it's positive now. Oh yeah, you can eat as much as you want. That's going to harm them. They're not ready for that. So that's, again, part of that awareness. We're going to do a lot of observation. We're going to figure out what's happening, why it's happening, beliefs, habits, fears. Where are these things being triggered for myself and for my child? Because again, those anchors might be for our kid, right? I might be needing to use worksheets for this child so that they feel like they can produce something without the performance. But for us, am I expecting this performance of the child? What are my fears and beliefs and habits that I'm noticing? We're doing this like collective awareness and these transitions together, okay? And then we're ready to move into a little bit, the next phase or thought here is stepping into those passions. And this part is messy, all right? This transition part where like, all right, I'm aware of that trauma and we're not, we're staying away from those triggers of things like resisting anything that looks like schools, whatever. We're going to keep some of those structures that make them feel safe in the transition, or we'll reintroduce some of them. That's okay too. If you've gone full on school and it didn't feel good, let's try, let's experiment. What happens if you set out some morning invitations every day? All right. If they're so resistant to anything that looks like school, don't put worksheets in front of them and trigger that trauma again. But maybe you just have this like daily open-ended thing. All right, grab my Wonder Year product for $10 and start bringing some of those things in just to like engage in that like grounding activity at the same time every day. All right, we'll talk about that one in a minute. But when we start to transition into like, okay, they're feeling safe at home again, and this is gonna be different for every kid. Some kids that might be a week, it might be a year. Everybody's different, right? So we're living in this like awareness and transition period, and slowly we're starting to step into passions. And again, a lot of 99% of the time, if you ask a kid who was in public school and you bring them home, I mean, honestly, most people are going to say this anyway. If you just blindside someone with, what do you want to learn about? More likely than not, the answer is going to be, I don't know. Honestly, if I asked my always unschooled kids that right this minute on camera, what do you want to learn about next week? They'd both say, I don't know. That's a weird question to ask someone because we don't, especially as kids, we don't always really know. That's not how motivation happens, right? If you think about from day two, those three ways to be motivated, either like seeing an immediate need, seeing a future need, or like having a genuine interest, none of those things happen like on the spot of someone asking you about it. Like, tell me something that you want to learn about. Most people can't say that. Or they are people pleasing, like part of their trauma is being people pleasing. So they tell you something that you think they want you to hear or that you want them to say. And that is even worse, right? Like, oh, let's see, I know my mom is really upset that I am not very good at math. So I want to learn more about math, mom. And they say that to make you happy. So you go deep into math and then secretly they hate it, right? Like you can see how all this can get so chaotic so quickly if we're not super fine-tuned awareness here. So it's okay to teach our kids here. Like the best thing you can do for this is modeling 100%. And this is so good for your deschooling too, right? Like don't always just ask your kids what they want to learn about. What do you want to learn about? Figure out that answer to figure out your own answer to that question and do it and let them see that you're taking classes, that you're trying something new, that you're learning how to rollerblade, or you're, auditioning for a play because you've missed doing that, or you're reading books that you haven't read in forever. Let them see that you're trying new things. And that sparks conversations. And we want to be like the people that we love and admire in our lives. So it doesn't have to be this thing that happens immediately. This can be a long journey. Healing is a long journey. And then the other thing you want to do is let them know that none of this is a performance. I don't expect you to figure something out and turn it into a whole big thing or do it forever. There's no better time. You can say this to your children. There's no better time in your whole life than in that window of childhood to try new things, because it doesn't matter if you don't like them and you quit. It doesn't matter. My kids have tried so many things. They have been gymnasts and like competitive swimmers and boxing lessons and scuba diving, like so many things my kids have tried. and decided not to continue pursuing. They took one or two classes and that wasn't for me, or they'll do it for a year and super love it and then just decide it's not for them anymore. There's never a better time than that they have no other responsibilities. They don't have to turn it into a career. They don't have to make money off of it. They don't have to justify it. And what a beautiful way to figure out what you do want to do in life. So let them know if there's something you want to try, we'll try it. I'll do it with you. You can invite a friend. What a great way to bridge that gap if they're missing friends from school. After school hours, we'll try. You want to try boxing? Which friend would you do that with? I'll sign you up for some boxing lessons. And this is where you can utilize community resources because yes, I've told you already, information is accessible everywhere, right? We live in a world where you can learn anything. But we also live in a world where more and more now we're seeing this like creative creator economy where people want to share what they're doing. I've never met an adult doing something that they're passionate about that didn't want to share that joy with someone else, especially with younger kids. Right now, those two, my oldest and his friend, they are working weekly with a man that my husband met by fixing his bike through a community event, who works for our local like parks department or for the state parks department. My kid's really into nature, so is his friend. That's how they became friends, through fishing. He takes them out once a week and goes to like local places out in nature and gives them like really, really high level ecology lessons, something they'd never touch in a textbook. And he has so much fun and they have so much fun. And I don't have to be the one that learns that and teaches it. And it's hands on and they're outside. And now they have a mentor that's showing them what's possible. My son wants to get scuba certified. I've contacted a local place that has a like the deep sea pool or whatever. And during school hours, all of their regular classes that are nights and weekends are sold out for months because adults are doing that after work. I told him, oh, my son's homeschooled. He loved it. That's great. We'll make a special class for him. Bring him in. What days can he come in? We'll do that. And he's creating a special private class at no additional cost for my son. His friend is really interested in welding. Through conversations, meeting people, I found somebody in our town that does welding projects, and he's going to start bringing him in next week and teaching him welding. And all of those situations, it's okay if they don't love it, but they got to try it. And it was so easy to find people that want to share that love with somebody else. So use your community and break the idea for yourself and your child that learning has to look, that's that belief, right? Learning has to look like watching a video, listening to a lecture, filling out a workbook, performing something. We're breaking away from that. All right, we're almost done here. Finally, the major piece here is routine, routine, routine. Every child is going to thrive on consistency, but especially a child that is coming out of a school system. The consistency is going to be so important. That's that, if nothing else. And I'm not saying you have to adhere to a school schedule, but you have to find something that is consistent for them. They need to know, for example, I can sleep as much as I want, but when I wake up, the first thing I'm going to do is have tea with my mom. Okay? Maybe that's the consistency. Or, no matter what else is happening during the day, right after dinner, we all sit around and we're going to do a read aloud. It doesn't matter what it is. We're looking for those anchors in the day that don't make every day feel like chaos, especially if they're going from an experience where every single second of their day is micromanaged. We want to transition to something where you have the autonomy, but we have anchors where they can expect something specifically from their caregivers. And I'm not going to make this go any longer, but the Aligned Homeschool Routines Workshop completely will do this for you. It will help you do all of these things, how to set that up, what to look for, how to find those anchors, how to know what they are. So that is the workshop that you need for that. And that is today. So tomorrow is our final day in the series, and we are going to do another day of the action here. I'm trying to like find the end of my notes. We're going to continue the action discussion with answering the most common question that I see online in like homeschool groups is, okay, I pulled them out of school. Now what? And really, I started answering that today, right, with the deschooling, because this is what I see more than anything is this like, all right, I got brave. You guys convinced me. Something convinced me. I withdrew them from school. And we've just been like sitting here staring at each other for a week. And I don't know what to do now. What do I do now? And so that's what we're going to answer tomorrow. So thank you for listening. Sorry today was a little bit longer. I could have kept going, but we'll stop. Okay, are there any major questions? I do actually have to take a call here in a bit, but let's see. I see comments. This isn't so much a question as a comment. I've always believed that all of life is learning. I would prefer to always have free child-led learning. My husband believes that levels 1 and 2 are the ways to educate our kids. That's because of conditioning. Of course he does. Most of us do. It's hard to educate the kids and heal my own school trauma and teach a grown adult a better way. Any thoughts or advice? Yes, you have a conversation with your partner that says, hey, I'm doing a lot of work to understand why I believe these things about learning and understanding how to do this better for our kids. And I understand that you still believe things a different way. And I think it's only fair that you do as much of this work as I'm doing. I can't heal you and me and them. You are an adult. If you don't agree with the way I'm doing things, I have information to present. So please listen to that. And then you send him these videos. Maybe pause it before we get to this point so he doesn't hear me confronting him. But this is not an uncommon thing, right? This happens all of the time where usually a mom has more of that intuitive sense of this isn't the way I want to raise my kids. I'm going to do something different. And they do unbelievable amounts of research, watch all kinds of videos, and end up in this situation where now they feel that it's their responsibility to educate their partner on why this is better. And it isn't really. You can, that's up to, if you are an adult and you did that work, your co-parent or your partner or whomever else you're doing this with is also an adult and also capable of doing this work. And if they're not willing to do that work, if they're not willing to learn and listen to what you're saying and have these discussions, then ultimately you're within your rights. And I'm not telling anyone, like, this is the hardest thing for me to have these discussions about relationships and educating kids, but I'm reaching a point in my life where I'm just being very raw with people. So I think ultimately at that point, if you can say, I've done all this work and I've done the extra emotional labor of compiling this information for you, please watch these things. And if there's no interest to learn and better themselves and hear from someone that is an expert, then there isn't ground to stand on to say, I want you not to do these things, right? And I have said before, some of the hardest advocating we have to do for our kids is often within our own four walls. So don't back down. Be brave enough to say, I want you to watch these things. If you're going to argue with me, if you're going to stand in my way of educating these children the way that I have researched and believe to be true, then you need to also do these things. And if he also watches all these videos and then he counters, then you can have conversations. Let's come to the table. Let's have these discussions. They are our children together. We have to make decisions together. Yes. But not if one party is doing all of the work and emotional labor and the other is just saying, well, that's just what I believe. Yes, I know. And I can tell you why you believe that, right? So join me. So invite him to watch all of these things. It's not your responsibility to impart all of this knowledge. That's mine. I'm doing that. So share this. Um, okay. Another partner question. This is interesting. I think this is maybe why my husband is having such a resistance to watching and learning this content. Um, he's 100% behind our son being a Bridge Academy student, but he's now realizing how much he may have traumatized his own students when he was an instructor with a very militant structure of learning that he used to swear by, and he doesn't want to mess up. I don't think he's quite ready to dive into his own trauma yet, and I'm glad this content is being created so he can unschool when he's ready. That's really, really good to notice. And I will tell you from a personal standpoint, that was the hardest thing for me to have to go through, was realizing that I was harmful in my experiences. That the few years that I did spend teaching in a classroom, and I can make excuses, right? I can say things like, well, I was a really young teacher and I was influenced by the older veteran teachers in my building or in my grade level. I could say things like, I didn't want to rock the boat. I can even be honest and say, I fully rocked the boat. I was hell bent on doing things and being the change in the system, but you can't. You simply can't. And I do still believe that I made a difference in kids' lives, and I wouldn't change my time in those classrooms for anything. However, that was the hardest part of healing this trauma for me, and it still breaks my heart some days to think about it, that I was a part of that system. So I understand. I understand that, and you do have to be ready for it because it isn't easy to undo realizing that you harmed people, especially if it's in a situation where you can't go back and I don't have contact with any of my students from 20 years ago, right? I can't go back and apologize to them necessarily. So all I can do is just heal that work on my own and move forward and make changes. Looks like there was some conversations between the two, so that's great. Okay, I think that's all. I'm gonna go, but definitely any questions that come up from watching this, you can, email, and I'll do my best to get back to you or like answer in more questions. Yeah, so we'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk about, okay, we're homeschooling, now what? All right, guys, thanks. Have a good day.